Cops regret stopping this old truck. 1 hour later, a 4-star general stepped out of a black SUV. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The wrench slipped. Walter Briggs crouched beneath the rear axle of a dusty Ford F-150, let out a soft grunt. Not from pain, just age. His hands, still strong at 70, bore the calluses of a man who never learned to sit still. The Missouri sun filtered gently through the oak trees that shaded the driveway. It was September, and the air carried that first whisper of fall. Cooler mornings, brittle leaves, a slower pace of day. He wiped his hand on a red rag, squinting up at the undercarriage. The Henderson kid's truck had a faulty oil filter. Nothing major. Walter had done this kind of thing 1,000 times, usually for people who couldn't afford a mechanic. He did it quietly. No charge. No praise needed. From inside the garage, Lynyrd Skynyrd played softly on a radio from another decade. Then came a sound. Not music. Tires. Fast. Too fast for Oakview Drive. Walter rolled out from under the truck, just as a black SUV screeched to a halt at the foot of his driveway. Within seconds, 3 more boxed it in. Doors flung open. Boots hit pavement. Rifles were raised. Police. Everyone on the ground. Now. Walter stood slowly, his palms open, wrench still in hand. Tactical vests. Visors. No faces. Just the glint of cold steel and a wall of urgency. There must be a mistake, he began, his voice gravel calm. A rifle barrel snapped toward his chest. Drop the tool. Down. Now. Walter dropped the wrench. It clanged once against the concrete. Another voice barked. Zip him. Rough hands twisted his arms behind him. The plastic bite of restraints pulled tight. Someone shoved him to the ground. Cheek pressed to the driveway. He tasted the oil and dust. Around him, radio chatter spiked. Securing perimeter. Possible suspect in custody. Then, vehicle matches profile. Confirming intel. He didn't fight. He didn't flinch. He had been through worse. But he hadn't been through this on his front lawn. Not while wearing grease-stained jeans. Not while the neighborhood watched from behind curtains. And not when Ellie was due home in less than 5 minutes. As if on cue, her sedan crept around the corner. Walter tried to lift his head. Wait, he called. My wife. But it was too late. Ellie, petite and silver-haired, parked in the driveway. She stepped out, holding 2 paper bags. Milk, eggs, a loaf of rye bread. She blinked at the sight of armored men. And then she saw Walter face down on the concrete. Walter? What is this? The closest officer turned. Ma'am, drop the bags. Show your hands. Excuse me? I'm just. Final warning. She hesitated, not out of defiance. Her hands shook. Arthritis. The bag slipped, but not fast enough. A flash. A click. Then a sound Walter would never forget. The crackle of a taser. Ellie's body convulsed. Groceries burst across the pavement. Eggs shattered. Milk pooled like white blood. Ellie collapsed, a marionette with its strings cut. Time stopped. Walter's breath didn't come. His mind didn't rage. It calculated. Assess. Prioritize. Stay alive. He turned his head, locked eyes with the officer wearing the rank patch, and spoke. 5 words. Call General Harlan. Right now. The effect was immediate. The commander froze. Not confusion. Recognition. Radio static faltered. One of the older officers murmured, Wait a second. Did he say Harlan? Another. Sir, check the address. The commander stepped forward, voice quieter now. What did you say, sir? Walter lifted his head. There was no anger in his eyes. Just disappointment. You're at 4880 Oakview Drive. You wanted 4880 Oakview Avenue. 2 miles east. Different zip code. The younger officer's face went pale. Walter added, Inside my jacket. Inside pocket. Black badge. Left side. Take it. But don't drop it. The commander hesitated, then pulled the badge. A black eagle. Tier 1 clearance. Silence fell like a curtain. Another officer backed away slowly. Sir, he whispered to the commander, I think this is the guy who trained Harlan's Special Operations Unit back in the 90s. The commander removed his helmet. Sweat on his brow. Cut him loose. Get the medic. Walter was already crawling to Ellie. She was conscious, barely. He cradled her head. "It's all right," he whispered. "I'm here. I've got you." Around him, the team unraveled. Radios blared for reroutes. Orders flew. Vehicles repositioned. And one officer, just one, picked up the spilled groceries. Walter never looked at him. His eyes were on Ellie. His voice, quiet but clear. "You didn't verify. You didn't check. You acted on fear, not fact. And then, I want General Harlan. Now." It began with a black sedan. No flashing lights. No sirens. Just four wheels whispering down a quiet street, pulling to a stop beside the crushed groceries and the lingering shame of it. Overreaction. The front door of the sedan opened. A man stepped out. No uniform. No medals. Just a charcoal suit and a presence that pulled the tension taut. General James Harlan. His gait was precise, his back straight, his eyes scanning. The kind of man who hadn't forgotten what battlefield discipline felt like. But today his war was with memory. Walter Briggs stood at the front steps, his arm around Ellie, who sat wrapped in a blanket, her face pale but alert. She didn't flinch when Harlan approached. She didn't need an introduction. Harlan stopped at the base of the steps. He removed his sunglasses slowly. Then, just like the old days, he saluted. Walter returned it without hesitation. Their eyes met, and years of silence flooded the space between them. Operations that never made the news. Nights huddled over maps under red light. The sound of radio static in foreign languages. The lives saved. The ones they couldn't. Finally, Harlan spoke. "They said you disappeared." Walter nodded once. "I did, but the world came knocking anyway." Behind Harlan, the SWAT commander stepped forward. "General." Harlan raised one finger. The officer fell silent. "This man," Harlan said, turning toward the gathered officers, now lined up like students before a blackboard, "trained me. He wrote the de-escalation playbook that's still taught in Tier 1 schools. The rules you just broke were his." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was humbling. Then came action. Orders issued. Files pulled. An officer, the youngest of the squad, the one who had fired the taser, was stripped of badge and vest right there on the lawn. "You're relieved," Harlan said. "Report to internal review." A murmur passed through the crowd of watching neighbors. Harlan didn't care. He turned back to Walter. "They'll launch an inquiry. The mayor's already been briefed. We'll issue a formal apology within 24 hours. But that's not enough." Walter said nothing. He didn't need to. "We need you back," Harlan added quietly. "The world's gotten louder and somehow less careful. People don't verify anymore. They just react." Walter looked at Ellie, who squeezed his hand. "I'm not coming back to the war, Jim," he said. "But maybe I can help fix the foundation." The next few days were a blur. Headlines circled. "Wrong house raid ends in public shame." "Retired officer exposes system flaw" with 5 words. The video, recorded by the neighbor across the street, hit 2.3 million views in under 72 hours. In one corner of the footage, Walter could be seen kneeling beside Ellie, whispering something only she could hear. The public didn't see rage. They saw calm. They didn't hear shouting. They heard truth. Soon after, a press conference was held. Harlan stood beside state officials, flanked by the police chief, community leaders, and one empty chair, meant for Walter. He didn't attend, but his name was on every microphone. Harlan announced a nationwide law enforcement training initiative, the 5 words protocol, mandatory for every active duty officer, focused on verifying before engaging, de-escalating before drawing, respecting before assuming. The protocol wasn't about apologies. It was about relearning judgment. Back home, Walter returned to his garage. The oil stains were still there. The truck from the day of the incident remained half-serviced. He picked up his tools. No fanfare. No interviews. Just a man finishing what he started. Neighbors came by, offering meals, cards, prayers. He thanked them, accepted some, declined others. What mattered most was Ellie. She was recovering. The bruises faded. Her voice steadied, but her posture changed. She walked taller now, looked officers in the eye when they passed in town, refused to be invisible. At night, she'd sit beside Walter on the porch. She once asked, "Why didn't you yell or fight?" Walter thought for a moment. Because the point wasn't to win a fight. The point was to make them remember who they were supposed to be. The school called the following week. Mr. Lawson, the auto shop teacher, had retired unexpectedly. "We heard you've worked with kids before," the principal said. "Would you consider teaching part-time?" Walter considered. Not for long. By Monday morning, he stood before 15 high schoolers in oil-stained jeans, holding a carburetor like it was a piece of art. "First rule," he began, "always know what you're touching." A boy in the back raised his hand. "Sir, are you the guy from the video?" Walter smiled. "Just a little." "That depends," he said. "Are you here to learn, or just talk?" The boy shut up and listened. Ellie came to visit the classroom once. She watched from the back, silent. After class, she touched his arm. "You look like you belong here," she said. Walter looked at the students, now packing up their tools. "Maybe we all do. Somewhere. Eventually." Late one evening, a package arrived. No return address. Inside, a framed copy of the 5 words. Protocol. At the bottom, "In honor of Walter Briggs, who reminded us what restraint really looks like." He didn't hang it on the wall. He leaned it behind the old radio in the garage, where only he and Ellie would see it, and where it would never collect dust. That's how change begins. Not with headlines, but with a man kneeling beside his wife. A voice calm in chaos. In 5 words that made an entire system remember what it had forgotten. It started with a wave. Just one. Officer Ramirez, who had patrolled Oakview Drive for years, slowed his cruiser and tipped his cap as Walter Briggs crossed the street. Walter paused mid-step, raising a brow. He hadn't been saluted in a decade, not even by active duty, but it wasn't a salute today. It was something else. Recognition. A quiet acknowledgement that didn't require medals or protocol. Just a nod. A shared understanding. That small gesture rippled through the town of Riverton. The changes came slowly. No headlines. No formal ceremonies. Just small shifts in how people carried themselves when Walter walked by. The kids who used to ride their bikes passed him with earbuds and now stopped to say, "Afternoon, Mr. Briggs." That title, Mr., hadn't been used in years. To most, he was the old guy who fixed engines for free. But now they knew better. 3 weeks after the incident, a box appeared on Walter's porch. No note. Inside, a new American flag, meticulously hand-stitched, its stars re-threaded, its edges reinforced. Walter held the fabric to his chest. The old flag had flown outside his garage for 17 years. Torn in 2 corners. Faded from Missouri's sun. Still proud. But now, he replaced it, raised it at dawn, stepped back, and saluted. Ellie watched from the screen door, her hand pressed gently to the glass. "They see you now," she whispered. Walter didn't answer. He didn't need to. At the high school, the students were different too. Not because they learned how to strip an engine block faster, but because of how they listened. When Walter spoke, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't command. He just asked questions that made them stop and think. Why do you tighten this bolt before that one? Why is patience important in repair work? What's harder to fix, a bad bearing or a bad habit? They didn't always answer correctly, but they paid attention. One afternoon, a student named Caleb stayed after class. He was quiet all year, troubled, always on edge. That day he lingered. "Mr. Briggs." Walter looked up from the carburetor. "Why didn't you, ruin them? The guys who hurt your wife? The ones who zip-tied you? You had the power, right?" Walter wiped his hands on a rag, set the tool down. He looked Caleb in the eye, not with judgment, with clarity, because fixing people is harder than punishing them, but lasts longer. Caleb nodded, just once, then walked away. Walter never brought it up again. He didn't have to. The town council passed a local resolution to recognize 5 Words Protocol Week. They invited Walter to speak at the town hall. He declined. Instead, he sent a letter, handwritten. Sometimes the loudest impact comes from those who never raise their voice. Keep your training sharp. Keep your humanity sharper. They read it aloud to a standing ovation. Walter was home, oil-stained in content, adjusting the timing on a '78 Dodge. The VFW post saw more foot traffic too. Younger vets stopped by, not just to drink, to talk, to ask Walter how he transitioned from classified missions to carburetors. He told them the truth. I stopped seeing myself as someone who needed to fight every battle. I started choosing which ones deserved peace instead. They didn't always understand, but they returned, week after week. One even brought his father to meet Walter. They sat for an hour. No politics, no glory stories, just three men talking about broken things and how to fix them. Walter's garage became something of a landmark. Not officially, but everyone knew where it was. One morning, a group of junior officers from the academy showed up in plain clothes. They waited quietly outside until Walter noticed them. "You boys lost?" he asked, wiping his hands. One stepped forward, nervous. "Sir, we just wanted to meet you. They made us read your file, the one about the Oakview incident. They say you're why they rewrote the de-escalation course." Walter chuckled. "That's so." The young man nodded. "Yes, sir. We were hoping you might teach us something. Not protocol, just people stuff." Walter looked over their faces. Most couldn't have been older than 22. He leaned against the workbench. "You want to understand people? Start by listening to them before you label them." The young officer asked, "Is that what you did that day?" Walter looked past them into memory. "No," he said. "That's what I didn't do years ago. And I wasn't about to repeat it when the barrel turned my way." One night, Ellie found Walter sitting on the porch. "Alone. Thinking about the past?" she asked. "No," he said. "Thinking about how far the future had to come just to remember old truths." She sat beside him. "Maybe it takes someone like you to remind them." He looked at her hand in his. "Or someone like you to keep me from forgetting myself." The new flag outside waved softly, not in celebration, in steady presence. A symbol not of authority, but of earned reverence. And that, in Riverton, was worth more than medals. It was a new kind of honor, one made from oil-stained rags, quiet guidance, and the unmistakable integrity of a man who stood taller when no one was looking. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Embossed envelope, gold seal, letterhead from the Missouri Law Enforcement Academy. Inside, a formal request for Walter Briggs to speak at their keynote ceremony for the launch of a new state curriculum. 5 words protocol, the human side of policing. He read it once, then placed it beside the old toolbox under a can of WD-40. He never picked it up again. A week later, the academy sent a second letter, this time handwritten. "Mr. Briggs, if you won't come to the podium, may we come to you?" Walter leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. He didn't smile, but he didn't throw it away either. That Saturday morning, 5 recruits pulled into his gravel driveway in a department-issued van. None wore a badge, just plain blue work shirts and jeans. Walter met them with grease on his palms and an old Buick jacked up on wooden ramps. No speech, no introductions. He handed the nearest one a wrench. "Loosen the lower bracket. Carefully. The bolts are original. Strip it and the whole thing's junk." The recruit nodded, got to work. The others followed. Hours passed. Walter said little, only corrected when necessary. But they watched how he moved, measured, methodical. How he addressed them, never with command, always with clarity. How he spoke to the car, like it was something worth saving. And slowly, the noise of the world faded, replaced by the hum of shared work and the quiet weight of learning. Word spread. More recruits came, not for training hours, for time. Time with someone who lived by the rules they were being told to memorize. Someone who didn't need to raise his voice to lead a room. They came not because they were ordered, but because the world outside the academy didn't teach restraint. Walter did. At the diner, an off-duty officer sat 2 booths away one afternoon. He watched Walter pour Ellie a cup of coffee, waited until he stood, then approached. "Sir," the officer said, voice steady but soft, "I was one of the men in the van that day." Walter looked up. "I remember." The officer reached into his coat, handed over a folded sheet, a printout of the new Officer Conduct Pledge. At the bottom, a note in pen. "It started at your garage." Walter nodded once, then turned back to Ellie. He didn't say another word, but he didn't need to. In October, a local foundation, spearheaded by veterans and civic leaders, launched a new initiative. The Briggs Award for Quiet Leadership, meant to honor those who led not through force, but example. Teachers, medics, community volunteers, People who never asked to be seen, but made a difference anyway. Ellie insisted on attending the first ceremony. She wore a soft green scarf, still healing, but walking on her own. Walter wore his cleanest denim shirt, the one with the missing second button. They sat in the front row, hands clasped. The mayor spoke. The police chief gave a speech about reform. A high school student read an essay about patience. Then the podium shifted. The announcer read from a page. For decades of service, both public and unseen, for reminding us that dignity does not require a uniform, and that strength does not require volume, we present the inaugural Briggs Award to its namesake, Walter Briggs. Applause rose. Walter didn't stand, until Ellie gave his hand squeeze. He rose slowly, walked to the stage, took the plaque, and said nothing, only nodded, and walked back down. The applause didn't stop. Later that evening, back at home, Ellie poured 2 glasses of iced tea. Walter sat on the porch swing, legs crossed, watching the neighborhood kids chalk stars on the sidewalk. "Do you think it'll last?" Ellie asked. Walter sipped slowly. "Change doesn't happen in speeches," he said. "It happens in garages, on sidewalks, between one person and another." She smiled. "Sounds like a speech to me." He chuckled. The garage continued to welcome visitors. But now they came from farther away. A young recruit from Arizona, a sergeant from Baltimore, a lieutenant from Spokane, each with the same story. They read about him, heard about him, or were told by someone who had. They didn't come to be impressed. They came to understand how someone could be so steady when so much had gone wrong. Walter offered no secrets, only tools, a task, and time. The rest was up to them. One afternoon, a girl named Lacey, 15 years old, part of the school's mentorship program, stood in the garage doorway. Walter was under a 91 Oldsmobile. She cleared her throat. "I don't know anything about engines." Walter's voice came from under the car. "Neither did I when I started. Get the jack stand." She did, and stayed all day. By sundown, they'd changed spark plugs and found a rusted clamp that needed replacement. Lacey stood at the door, grease on her cheek. "Thanks, Mr. Briggs." Walter tipped his cap. "Bring work gloves next time." She beamed. He turned back to the car, didn't watch her leave, but listened to the sound of possibility in her steps. One night, months after the original raid, a reporter called. Again, he wanted an interview, a follow-up, something about the anniversary. Walter said no, but Ellie answered differently. She handed Walter the phone. "Just this once," she said. The reporter asked, "Mr. Briggs, do you think you've changed the system?" Walter paused. "I didn't set out to change anything," he said. "I just refused a break. And sometimes that's what people remember." The academy class of that year graduated under a new code. Printed inside each graduate's handbook was a quote in bold italics. "Fixing people is harder than punishing them, but lasts longer." Attributed simply to WB. Walter never saw the handbook. He didn't need to. He was under a truck that morning, guiding a shy teenage volunteer through her first oil change. And as the grease pressed into his knuckles and the radio hummed low in the background, Walter knew. He didn't need to be remembered, only followed, one turn of the wrench at a time. A full year had passed, but to Walter Briggs, time moved differently now. He still walked his 2-mile route each morning, a worn canvas satchel over his shoulder. Same stride, same boots, same gaze that studied sidewalk cracks and remembered where they didn't used to be. The neighbors noticed, though, the subtle shifts, the patrol cars slowing to nod, the teens who paused their skateboards, the way dogs wagged as he passed, as if recognizing a man whose presence calmed more than just engines. Walter still fixed machines, but more people were arriving now with hearts that needed a tune-up too. He never put up a sign. Didn't need to. They came to him anyway, one by one, sometimes in uniform, often in silence. A nurse named Jean came first, 49, divorced, and caring for a father who had once served in Korea. A man who rarely spoke and had never accepted thanks. He used to clean his shoes with a toothbrush, she told Walter. Never let us throw out his medals, but never displayed them either. Do you think he's ashamed? Walter shook his head. No. Some men carry memory like weight. Not shame, just depth. Jean nodded, eyes misting. She stayed for tea, left with a quieter heart. Then came Mason, 19, freckles, tattooed forearms. Not a soldier, not a mechanic, just a boy who couldn't keep a job because he looked too angry all the time. He asked Walter, "How do you stay calm when people assume the worst?" Walter wiped his hands, motioned him over. They worked side by side on a stubborn alternator for nearly 3 hours before Walter finally said, "You can't stop people from assuming, but you can choose not to become what they expect." Mason returned 3 times that week. The stories kept coming. A woman whose brother never returned from Iraq. A man who walked with a limp and asked about forgiveness. A high school teacher who confessed over carburetor grease and coffee that she didn't know how to reach her students anymore. Walter listened, didn't rush, didn't fix them, just showed them what steady looked like. The VFW was fuller now on Thursdays. Some came just to shake his hand. Others came to speak, but most came to watch. How Walter didn't command a room. He guided it, not by volume, but by how he poured someone else's coffee before his own, how he picked up the chairs afterward, how he knew everyone's name and remembered their fathers. One chilly February morning, Ellie stepped onto the porch and found a folded flag in a sealed case. No card, no message, only a note etched in brass, for the man who reminded us why we serve. She brought it inside, placed it on the mantel beside the faded wedding photo. Walter didn't ask who left it. He just stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, silent. Spring came. The high school invited him to speak at Career Day. He said no, but he agreed to host small groups again. This time they brought notebooks and questions. One girl asked, "What's the biggest thing you ever fixed?" Walter paused, looked out at the group, then said quietly, "My own anger. Took 30 years. Still a few bolts loose." They wrote that down. It wasn't long before a local pastor knocked, not to convert, just to ask, "Would you mind if we brought some of our young men by? They think strength is a loud thing. Maybe you could show them otherwise." Walter agreed. One Sunday a month, a group of 5 sat on crates around his garage, sipping lemonade and watching him rebuild a carburetor with hands older than their grandfathers. One boy asked, "Did you ever kill anyone?" Walter didn't flinch. "I served. That's all I'll say." "Did it change you?" Walter nodded. "Everything changes you, especially the things you survive." Sometimes he still had nightmares. Ellie would hold his hand and not ask questions. He would rise early, sit by the garage door with black coffee, and listen to the wind. But the ghosts no longer controlled the rhythm of his days, only reminded him of the cost of peace. In June, a young deputy named Keegan stopped by. He had just completed 5 words protocol training. They said you helped write it. That was based on how you handled. That day, Walter didn't correct him. Keegan looked nervous. "I just wanted to say thanks. I think it saved someone last week. A kid." We slowed down, talked, didn't escalate. Walter nodded. "That's the job." Keegan asked, "Can I leave something here?" He pulled a coin from his pocket, a challenge coin from his graduating class. Walter took it gently. "Then you'd better come back to earn it again." Legacy, Walter realized, wasn't what people remembered about you. It was what they practiced because of you. It wasn't medals. It was manner, not ceremony, but consistency. He never told people how to live. He just lived, and let that speak louder. At the hardware store, people greeted him like an old friend. At the diner, they poured his coffee before he sat. At the school, they named the garage shop after him, the Briggs Bay. He didn't attend the ribbon cutting, but he sent a wrench. His first one, wrapped in cloth, tagged with a note, "Build with patience, repair with mercy." Ellie sometimes caught him standing at the porch railing, watching the flag ripple. "What are you thinking?" she'd ask. "How strange it is," he'd say, "that a man who tried so hard not to be seen is now the reason people look a little closer at each other." The town of Riverton had changed. No statue, no parade, just better questions being asked, and better answers being lived. Because of a man who fixed more than engines. He fixed perspective. And every Thursday, Walter still walked to the VFW, toolbox in hand, boots tied tight, just in case someone needed help starting something that wouldn't turn over. Or maybe someone who just needed a place to begin again. The wind had changed overnight. You could feel it in the way the porch boards creaked, the way the leaves whispered down Oakview Drive. The last amber breath of autumn swept through the town, soft as a memory, steady as an old man's stride. Walter Briggs stepped outside. Same jacket, same boots, a thermos of black coffee in one hand, a folded flag in the other. Ellie stood at the screen door behind him, her voice warm, familiar. "It's brisk. That's how you know it matters," Walter said. She didn't ask where he was going. She never had to. He made the walk every November 11th, rain or shine, since long before anyone in town took notice. Now, they watched from behind curtains. They paused conversations. They let silence follow him, not out of pity, but respect. He passed the Parker house first. Youngest son waving from the porch, 7 years old, holding a crayon drawing of a flag. He saluted, not out of habit, but conviction. Walter nodded once and kept walking. A police cruiser slowed at the stop sign. Officer Keegan behind the wheel. He didn't turn on the lights, didn't roll down the window, just tipped his cap and waited. Walter crossed without a word. Some messages don't need repeating. At the corner of 4th and Main, he stopped. An elderly woman in a wheelchair sat beneath the awning of the general store. She raised a hand. "Still carrying that old flag, Briggs?" He smiled. "Only the ones worth carrying." She nodded. That was enough. The cemetery was quiet. It always was. But today, even the birds seemed to give him space. He walked past rows of stone. Names he knew. Some he'd trained. Some he'd fought beside. Others he'd only met when digging through records to make sure no one was forgotten. He reached the northeast corner. Same plot. Same ritual. Walter knelt, took a breath, planted the new flag in the damp soil. Its colors crisp, its stitching firm. He brushed a leaf off the nearest marker. Whispered, "You're still seen." Then stood, hands behind his back, eyes forward. The breeze caught the edge of the flag and lifted it. For a moment, it looked like it might fly. Behind him, quiet footsteps approached. He didn't turn, didn't need to. Ellie rested a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't tell me you'd be replacing more than one today," she said. He nodded toward the row. 3 more names added this year. All quiet men. She stepped beside him. Together, they read each name. No eulogies, only presence. As they left, Walter noticed something he hadn't seen before. Along the path back to the truck, new flags. Dozens. All placed with care. Not military regulation, but precise enough. At the gate, a small plaque had been mounted to the iron fence. "Because one man reminded us what remembering looks like." Walter said nothing, but Ellie saw the way his jaw tightened. Emotion restrained, but not repressed. She took his hand. "They're watching. Not to praise. To learn." He nodded. That night, back home, Walter sat on the porch as the sun set. The flag above his garage fluttered, clean, intact. Not faded, not lowered. A reminder that service doesn't stop at discharge. That legacy isn't carved in granite, but woven through the way you live long after the battlefield is gone. A neighborhood boy walked by, paused, and saluted. Walter raised his coffee in return. Later, Ellie brought out a blanket, draped it over his lap. "You've done more good in this town by fixing spark plugs than most do with policies." He chuckled. "The trick isn't the fixing. It's not breaking things worse in the process." She leaned against him. "Still got work to do?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Always." The final image is quiet. The camera pulling back. Walter, seated beneath the warm porch light. The wind lifting the corner of the flag. Its colors bold against the fading sky. No spotlight. No broadcast. Just a man who served. Still serving. In an increasingly fast-paced world, where louder voices drown out silence, and everything is defined by titles, accolades, or social media. The story of Walter Briggs, an elderly veteran living quietly in a small town, reminds us of a fading value, the power of quiet kindness. Walter didn't change the world through speeches. He didn't launch media campaigns or deliver public addresses. He never asked to be recognized. He simply lived steadfastly, consistently, and with compassion. He repaired machines with his calloused hands, but it was the way he mended hearts that became his true legacy. The lesson from Walter Briggs doesn't lie in a single heroic act, but in his choices, choosing compassion when hurt, choosing to build rather than retaliate, and most importantly, choosing to continue serving even when no one required him to. In today's world, all of us at some point are misunderstood, judged by appearance, or overlooked because of age, profession, or circumstance. And we're given two choices: to push back in anger, or to quietly prove our worth by the way we live. Walter chose the harder path, patiently repairing rather than lashing out. He didn't respond with resentment. He responded with consistency, still walking his 2-mile route each morning, still placing flags at the cemetery, still teaching students how to listen to the sound of an engine. As a metaphor for listening to people, this applies directly to our lives. Whether you're retired, a grandparent in a multi-generational household, a mechanic, a teacher, or simply the neighbor who keeps the gate open for others, your steady, kind presence can become a moral compass for the next generation. Not everyone will get the chance to change an entire system like Walter did, but everyone can become a quiet source of inspiration in their own community. A calm word in a tense moment, an act done without expecting a thank you, a show of patience when others lose theirs. This is how you plant the seeds of change. And as the world becomes noisier and more chaotic, people like Walter, or like you, will be the place others look to for direction. Because, as the final voiceover in the story says, some heroes don't stop serving. They just serve differently. Be one of them, quietly, but meaningfully. Thank you so much for being here. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to bring you more heartfelt stories soon. Until next time, stay kind, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next one.